let's move on to the Hawthorn Football Club, because it was a sobering beginning, Matthew Lloyd, to their season in 2023 on Sunday. They were absolutely bewildered by the Bombers, really, particularly in that second half. And I guess it does have a lot of us asking, what is this direction under Sam Mitchell and what is the long-term plan? Now, we know they went under significant change. Jim and Damo took so far as their list. They bring in some experience in the likes of Carl Amon, but otherwise, look who they're missing and who's going out the doors. Gunston, Mitchell, O'Meara, Shields played well on the weekend. There's some serious experience there. So you were there for 3AW on Sunday, Jimmy. You saw it. It's to be expected that they're going to be one of the weaker sides in the competition, but it's just how weak.
Yeah, but the names you put on the right, how many could you argue would be in their next premiership, which they're clearly going through a rebuild or whatever way you want to phrase it?
Surely you can't live by the notion that no one that is not in your next premiership can play. You need experience in some corners, don't you?
Yeah, but they've got a clear plan. And look, on the weekend, their pressure rating was one of the lowest in the last 2 years. That doesn't actually have to do with talent. That's intent and the way you go about your football.
Or that you're too young.
They are young, but they're trying to build it. So you go through who they've drafted. They've actually drafted Granger, Barras and Day, who's now moving up in the midfield. They're looking up the back line. They're getting midfield depth. They lack forwards. Of course, when you've got Mitchell Lewis out of the side, Kaczynski, both young players, they're going to still have to address that through the draft. So they're still in this phase of trying to build to a premiership side. But you have a look at it without going through them all. I've written down probably a dozen names. They have some serious talent that nearly every recruiter would have bent over backwards to have on their list.
Jimmy, they tell us they're in the business of winning premierships. And I think even the CEO, Justin Reeves, said that to you as recently as the weekend, Sam. But they're certainly not in the business this year of trying to win as many matches as they can. And if you want to put a certain lens over that, the way they've structured themselves for the future this year, it's a form of tanking to what they've done this year.
You think they're deliberately...
A form of tanking. Now,
there's tanking or they're not.
Well, the AFL doesn't have a definition of tanking, Sam.
That was a while ago now.
Well, they still haven't. They still haven't got a definition of tanking.
What's your definition of tanking?
My definition of tanking is using the rules that allow losing to be of benefit.
Do you think Hawthorn are doing that?
Well, they're going to get a benefit in a draft pick of some sense. And this is what you're referring to when Gillon McLachlan, the then...
That's a decade ago.
Yeah, it is. But have you heard him on record since? He doesn't know what the definition of tanking is. He's referring to it, there was no tanking on match day. And look, Sam Mitchell and everyone attached to Hawthorn, the entire list, will be arguing on match day, they are absolutely trying. And they will be trying against Sydney on the weekend. There's no question of that. But it's the composition of the list and the trading out of a Mitchell who was contracted and to then pay him to play for another club this year, that I think throws into question and doubt.
Lordy, I was sitting on the couch on Monday watching you and Kane and Karen Hutchie talk about this issue, and Kane was adamant that Hawthorn, in order to improve quickly, needed the number one pick. Yeah. But every single year, and I know that the number one pick sounds like he's going to be the next Dustin Martin, we hear that every year about every number one pick, but the difference between pick 1 and pick 6, I just don't think the juice is worth the squeeze insofar as finishing at the bottom and damaging your culture.
Well, this might be a year where he's really special, this player, but it's where it gets you. And
Harley Reid.
And the issue I have with it, and I'm not as strong as Damo on it in terms of where Damo just came from there, but it's what it does. You're seeing your players like a Luke Bruce, for example. He'll really find this a difficult way to end his career, where you rarely win a game of football, and you ask yourself, should I have been the Jack Gunston? Should I have taken these opportunities to leave? And then you've got a heap of players down the bottom end who they don't know how to win. During the Gold Coast, players have known how to win for a long time. And when Scully and Trengo end up leaving your football club. So I think he did cut too hard. And I think you can forget how to win if you go too strong.
The point about Melbourne when they were going through that demo is that they were actually tanking, if they were tanking, for an extra pick. Like, they weren't tanking for pick 1. It actually got them pick 1 and pick 2. Yep. I actually think
there's degrees of tanking, so
that's quite different.
It's not as if
But you wouldn't just tank to get a better draft pick by 3.
They're setting themselves up this year. And again, I'm not saying they're trying to lose matches on a weekly basis. But they don't have a list that's going to allow them to win as many matches as they would have had they kept those players.
But
and they've done that for a reason. They want to set themselves up better.
You think they're choosing to bottom out?
Yeah, well, clearly.
Like Melbourne and Carlton have.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a way that I don't think we've rarely seen before.
Oh, so you don't believe there's a club last year that was doing this, or the year before?
Not to this extent. Not to this extent. North Melbourne just butchered its operations as opposed to trying to finish last
season.
So
you don't think Sam Mitchell will be under any pressure at the end of this year or the year, because the club is full
Yeah, well,
I understand.
he'd want to have some security around the decisions he's made. And Sam Mitchell is not short of confidence, you know that. And that is a compliment to him. But he will need the support of the club as this does get uglier.
But I think you guys are overlooking a couple of the examples that you referenced, Melbourne and Gold Coast, then acknowledge the fact that they actually didn't have their developmental coaching staff in place to actually teach these young emerging players.
Yep.
And I take your point of the number one draft pick, but the clubs that have been really successful by bottoming out or going to the draft, it's multiple picks with strong development programs in place. So Melbourne's their big shift when they went and got Mark Williams, renowned development coach. Gold Coast has put a lot more effort in it with Reece Shaw. You go through each of the clubs, the first thing they notice, even when Essendon are going through their turmoil, what's the first thing that they address? Development. They put a bulk of numbers into development.
Let me ask you this, Jimmy. Do you think that the league is still incentivising teams finishing lower to get better faster?
Yeah, it's set up that way because that's the draft. Whenever you have the bottom gets first pick.
So it's not in Sam Mitchell's interest to win 8 games this year.
But I don't think they're capable of winning 8 games. So what's the...
But no one would have thought Collingwood were capable of being a kick.
They were last year, but every time you have O'Meara and Mitchell, his plan is clearly to have sustained success to compete for 4 to 5 years, and that's out of Sam Mitchell's mouth. We don't want to just win, we want to keep winning. If O'Meara and Mitchell are on the list, you're going to play them, and that's because they are the best player. But does that mean that you park McKenzie in the VFL for a year and you miss out on 20 games? Does it Connor McDonald still stay forward and not come through and get midfield time?
So it's not just the on-field that they're dealing with. We know that they're dealing with this ensuing racism investigation, and it's upset some clubs. Damo, I think you strongly reported on AFL.com a few months ago after the grand final around the degrees in which clubs reacted to it. Justin Reeves was asked about that very point on the radio on the weekend.
Well, I've certainly had nothing negative from North Melbourne.
Brisbane?
Greg and I think it was quite public. We had I wouldn't say it was a heated conversation at all. It's been reported that way in grand final day. This was in the week of it. It was emotional. Greg and I had an exchange. It certainly wasn't heated. There was certainly no threats. I never even thought about it again until it was, I think Damien Barrett reported it. But I would have had hundreds more robust conversations with that over the last 5 years as CEO.
Well, there's lots of robust conversations because the conversation you had with Greg Swan on Grand Final Day last year, I didn't see it, but I've spoken to many people who... You did?
Yeah, it was robust.
Right.
We'll
describe what you saw.
I would describe it as
I've already reported as being...
I saw you report it, and it was exactly what I saw. I mean, it didn't go over the top. It wasn't as though fists were going to be thrown, but you could understand from Greg Swan's perspective, his coach has been absolutely thrown into turmoil, as has his club, when they were all blindsided by it.
Without a word of warning before it was made public.
That's right. And Justin will argue and has argued that it's not the club's role to investigate these sort of situations. They were simply going and asking questions. But I think when you ask that many questions to that many people surrounding behaviour and treatment of First Nations Australians...
And outcomes as they were, allegations of racism...
Yeah, I think you've got to be prepared for the worst, don't you? And it's turned into one of the biggest battles that the AFL has had to deal with in the modern era.
Yeah, without a right of reply to those allegations under the investigation you implemented and then sent and handballed to the AFL to deal with.
It's been a mess.
Yeah.